Let's pretend it's 1985. I am awakened by a noise. Dad would normally leave for work at like 2 a.m. for that early shift. And for the life of me, I can't remember if that was one of those mornings he worked or not. Was that just him in the kitchen? Was it the sound of his loose change hitting the little bowl that we kept above the microwave? Maybe it's the air conditioning trying to turn back on and end this infernal silence, and somehow save me. There is nothing quite like the seemingly decades-long pause as you waited for the central air to turn back on and drowned out the sound of 1,000 possible dangers. The monster under the bed. The Dracula in the closet. That Say No to Drugs commercial that really freaked you out right before bed.
Yes!
There are so many dangers in a young person's room that no parent knows about, and that a child just has to suffer through. But it was always nice to know that when terror was at an absolute fever pitch, there was always a way to silence the dangers. With the light on, nothing could get at me, and everything was possible. And in my case, the light, my ultimate salvation, was a Snoopy light switch. When I needed a hero, I always looked to the bird and the beagle.
Jimmy, it's 3 a.m. Turn the light off.
Sorry, Mom! So this year I turned 46. Let me be clear, starting this off, I don't consider being 46 any kind of major feat. I've kept my head down, I've been kind to my liver, and as the great Dick Van Dyke always says, I just try to keep moving. But comparatively, Peanuts didn't just make it to 46, they made it to 50. All of a sudden, magically, that number starts to sound particularly impressive. 50 years and almost 18,000 published strips. So Linus and the gang have certainly aged better than I have, that's for sure. But you know, middle age is not easy. I take longer doing things now, and I spend an inordinate amount of time just trying to make things look easy. If I were to sum middle age up in one sound, it would go something like this.
Ugh! Ugh! Ugh!
But I guess if Charlie Brown can still keep on trying to kick that football, then I guess I can keep on trying to find the best position in which to sleep in which I won't snore and wake up with a sore throat and or migraine. Don't let Lucy near my humidifier. She'd probably pull it away at the last minute. There's just so much to relate to in the strip and in Sparky's work, even more so now than when I was a kid. The Peanuts characters, even depicted as children, were always asking why, looking at life anew even though they were seemingly old souls. And I too sometimes look at the discourse online, the noise that tries to seep into my little world from parts afar, and the complete lack of empathy on full display, and I also ask, why? I guess even now I'm still looking toward the Snoopy light switch, now hidden behind old paneling in my childhood bedroom. Still looking for that light. So yeah, that was my thesis statement. I hope you enjoyed it. And to sum it up succinctly, what can a person headed towards their 50th year on this planet learn from Peanuts today? What can you learn? And how did we end up here?
Stop dancing!
And the best way to do that is to start at the beginning, which for Peanuts was 1950. But before we do that, you may be asking yourselves, why am I the guy to break down Peanuts year by year? Well, let's call my mother.
Hello.
Hey Mom, real quick, what was my first word, like when I was a baby?
You said, let's see, big dog,
Oh, well, what was my second?
Dada,
Really? That was my second? What was my third?
Baba,
Okay, I've hung a lot of context on this here, so I'm hoping it was my fourth. What was my fourth word?
Snoopy.
So there you go. My fourth word was Snoopy. So I'm qualified to talk about Peanuts. So before we dive into years 1 and 2 of the comic strip, I wanted to set the tone for the year 1950. Okay, sidebar real quick. Since Peanuts started late in the year, I decided to expand this first episode and do 1950 and 51 together to get a real sense of the early years of the comic strip. Sidebar over. And by the way, if you just know the creator of Peanuts as Charles Schulz, you're going to get to know him as Sparky, a name given to him as a child based on a character from a comic strip called Barney Google. Incidentally, this info that I'm rattling off is based on years of Peanuts interest on my part and also the internet. I'm no expert. I'm not an encyclopedia. I'm not even a Charlie Brown encyclopedia. Schulz returned from the Army in 1945, 2 years after the death of his mother, and soon started a comic strip called Little Folks in his local St. Paul newspaper in 1947. United Features Syndicate eventually became interested and picked up the strip, but wanted the name changed, and they eventually settled on the title of Peanuts. And they probably based that on the name Buffalo Bob called the kids on the Howdy Doody show. Sparky hated the title and was always salty about it. Yes, I just said Sparky was salty about Peanuts. He never liked even using the title and would regularly tell people, yeah, I draw that comic strip with Snoopy in it. You know, Charlie Brown and his dog. Just anything so he didn't have to say Peanuts. Peanuts premiered on October 2nd, 1950 in 7 newspapers, running for the first 2 years on Monday through Friday. It wasn't until 1952 when the strip made the jump to Sundays, 6 days a week. At its height, Peanuts would reach almost 3,000 papers in 75 countries in 21 languages. And in that entire 50-year span, Sparky only took one break. A 5-week break in 1997 to celebrate his 75th birthday. The first strip is just classic Peanuts, appealing, almost cherub-like characters, but with a bent towards the cynical. As Shermie remarks to Patty, "Good old Charlie Brown, how I hate him." Shermie and Patty are obviously enjoying their main character status while they can, and Charlie Brown has yet to adopt his trademark zigzag shirt, as you can plainly see. The characters will continue to change and evolve over the first few years of the strip. 2 days later, we had the first appearance of Snoopy, wearing a very fashionable flower on his head. Snoopy drops a question mark here. It would be a few years before Snoopy developed real vocabulary, and eventually became pretty proficient at using a typewriter. The following week, Charlie Brown and Snoopy appear in their first strip together. It's not always clear who owns Snoopy in the early strips. Eventually, Sparky would adopt a pretty strict continuity, but early on things were still developing. Charlie Brown was more of a little scamp in the early strips, but here, much like the first strip, there was occasionally hints of the punching bag nature that Charlie Brown would eventually be known for. Most assuredly qualities that Sparky would assign to himself, thinking back to the days in which his drawings were rejected from his high school yearbook.
You are Charlie Brown.
Probably, or maybe 60%.
60% of Charlie Brown is you.
I think so.
And 40% is your imagination of composites of other people and things.
On November 3rd, we established that Charlie Brown is 4 years old. However, for the bulk of the strip, Sparky seems to center on him being 8 years old. A few days earlier, on October 30th, we established that that is in fact Charlie Brown's birthday. That date is never referenced again, however. Here, Charlie Brown references his fear of growing up, and not the destination of getting old, but the actual getting there. The reality that the act of living might actually be more painful than death itself. Look at this, how Sparky uses the same panel 3 times to set up this little moment of melancholy. Sparky could really veer from one big extreme like this to something much more whimsical, like Snoopy being used as a coat rack. Early on, Snoopy had an ongoing obsession with sweets, and various characters would try to sneak candy without him hearing. It was definitely a go-to gag for Sparky. Another runner involved Patty and her constant preparation of mud pies. I've always chalked this up to something that kids probably did when Sparky was a child. It always felt very Dennis the Menace to me. Early Peanuts included many staples of 50s kids culture: cowboys and Indians, comic books and marbles, and so many wagons. On December 21st, Charlie Brown sports his first zigzag shirt, and it pretty much stuck immediately. Sparky felt it would really help the character jump off the page. Moving on to 1951, Charlie Brown's first attempt at shoveling sidewalks. This is a motif that Sparky would keep going back to, as various neighbors would thwart good old Charlie Brown's plans of having a side hustle, whether it be shoveling snow or raking leaves. The blockhead rarely had luck going door to door.
I got 5 pieces of candy. I got a chocolate bar. I got a quarter. I got a rock.
Once again, Sparky hasn't quite decided whose dog Snoopy is, as Charlie Brown and Snoopy seem to have separate homes. This is our introduction to Violet Gray, our second female character, and the first female character to pull the football away from Charlie Brown. Both Patty and Violet would eventually be phased out, as Lucy became the central female character in the strip, and also after another Patty would supersede the hierarchy. The first of many references to Beethoven here. In the late 40s, Sparky became an avid fan of classical music and had a vast record collection. Later on, his fandom would be fully harnessed into the character of Schroeder. So here begins an ongoing jag of various Peanuts characters hating anything relatedly coconut, which Sparky also hated, so art imitates life. The first utterance of the word never before was there a central character whose every catchphrase was an exclamation of pain or distress, but nonetheless all extremely marketable. On May 30th, Sparky introduced Schroeder, with whom he named after a young boy he used to caddy with at Highland Park Golf Course in St. Paul. Here, Charlie Brown meets Schroeder as a baby, but within a year or so, they are pretty much the same age. Within the first few months, he would begin to show off some of his musical talent, and by the following September, he would first take his seat behind his toy piano. I finally gotten to that age where I look at Schroeder's patented piano posture, and I think, geez, that can't be good for your back. Well, here's a big moment. On August 16th, Violet is the first character to call Charlie Brown a blockhead. Here we see Snoopy roar like a lion. His imitation of animals would become go-to fodder for many strips over the years. My favorite being his dead-on vulture impression. Most people probably remember Snoopy imitating animals in A Charlie Brown Christmas. I remember I brought this record to school one year, and my teacher played it during quiet time, and I stood up and imitated Snoopy imitating a penguin for my class, and it went over really well. In October of '51, we have a full week of Halloween content. Some Peanuts staples are established here: Kids with Sheets On, Charlie Brown and his pumpkin head, Tricks or Treats, all things we'd end up seeing in the Great Pumpkin Special a decade and a half later. So that, my friends, is the first 2 years of Peanuts. As you can see, we're laying groundwork here and establishing characters as Sparky finds his voice and takes the first steps in turning what is seemingly just another cute 50s comic strip on the old funny papers into something that will eventually ooze melancholy and ennui from every single pore. Spiritually, in just a few years, these characters will age decades. You know, I find that as I get older, the list of things that interest me seem to narrow. I no longer merely like a litany of 20 to 30 things or people, but I love and treasure, maybe 7 things. And Peanuts is at the center of those things, as it was obviously one of the first things that ever was for me. Starting at the beginning and reading it from year to year has been very rewarding and eye-opening for me on a personal level, and through the strip, I kind of feel like I'm getting to know myself again, if that makes any sense. I hope it does. It definitely does to me. And I hope you enjoyed this video and going through the first 2 years of the comic strip. Eventually, after a little break, we'll meet here again and we'll pick up with 1952. The first year where Peanuts expanded to 6 days a week. Also, as a quick aside, I recently watched Welcome Home Franklin on Apple TV. I was hesitant about these new Peanuts specials because to me they don't always capture the spirit of Sparky, but I found this one to be pretty great. It has some nice nods to Franklin's intro in the comic strip. There's a scene that references the Thanksgiving special, you know, the seat thing that the internet always uses for clickbait. It was in the trailer, so I knew they were going to do it, but it played really sweetly, so I was kind of there for it.
Yeah, the end kind of tips into schmaltz and veers away from something that Sparky would have done, but much like the Peanuts movie did. But it does feel genuine and doesn't come off as a lot of fake enthusiasm, which is how a lot of children's entertainment feels to me nowadays. I actually got choked up a little bit at the sincerity of it all. As Linus would say,
Nothing but sincerity as far as the eye can see.
so I highly recommend it. And I also highly recommend Apple TV, because Flash Beagle really cooks in HD.